Hello and welcome back. So now it's finally time to connect the MongoDB database that we created with our Express application. And the first step in doing that is to actually get our connection string from Atlas. So just like we did before, when we connected the database to Compass and to the Mongo shell, we need to get our connection string in order to connect the application to this hosted database. Now, in case you're not using the hosted database on Atlas, then I will also show you how to connect your local database with the application a bit later in this video. Alright? Anyway, just click here on Connect Your Application, and then this here is our connection string. Just make sure that you select Node.js here actually, because the string might change based on that. Now we also need the version, and of course it's later than 3. And so let's now go ahead and copy our connection string, and then back in our application, we create it as an environment variable here in our config file. So I already have database password. Let's create database now, and then put our string in here. Now, two things about this connection string. First, here in this place, we need to put in our password. Now we could go ahead and copy the password from here and then paste it here, but I prefer to leave it in a separate variable and then replace it in code. Okay, I will just actually change this password here to an uppercase password, okay? So password to make it a bit more visible. Then second, this here is actually our host, so basically the place where the database is hosted, and then /test. Okay, now this test here is the name of the database that we want to connect to. And in our case, we already created the Naters database, right? Let's check that out actually here back in Compass. And if we go here to collections, then we see that here we already have our Naters database. So we did that by the end of the last section, remember? And so it's very important that here in this connection string, we replace this test with the name of our database. So Naters, okay? So very important here, again, do not forget to put this here, otherwise it's not going to work, alright? Now, in case you're using the local database, like I just mentioned before, this connection string is a lot easier. So let's just create a variable for that one as well, database local. But again, if you're using this database string here, you don't need to worry about this part, okay? I'm just doing this in case that you are using the local one. And so in this case, it's quite simple. It's just MongoDB. And this is kind of a protocol here. So instead of HTTP, Mongo uses these like MongoDB protocol or something. Then localhost, and then the port, which we already talked about a couple of times, and it's 27017. Right? Remember that? And then just like before, we also need to specify the name of the database, which should be Naters, right? Now, in order for this to work, of course, you need to keep your MongoDB server, so that MongoD process running at all times. So switching here to the terminal, so this local process here is the one that I mean, okay? So never close this process, so this terminal window, when you're working with your local database. Okay, so otherwise it's not going to work. Okay, and that's it for configuration. Next up, we need to install a MongoDB driver. So basically a software that allows our node code to access and interact with a MongoDB database. And there are a couple of different MongoDB drivers, but we're going to use the one that I would say is the most popular one, which is called Mongoose, which adds a couple of features to the more native MongoDB driver. Okay, but don't worry, in the next lecture, you're actually going to learn all about Mongoose and why we're using it. Okay, for now, let's just go ahead and install it. So Mongoose, and the version that I'm going to use is version 5, and so please go ahead and install version 5 as well, so that we're on the same page with our code here. Okay, so by the time you're watching this video, Mongoose 6 or even 7 maybe might already be out there, and then something might have changed, and then your code might not work the exact same way. Okay, so please just install version 5, because that's actually a pretty stable version at this point, and I don't think that they are going to add much important features in the future. Alright, so in our package.json, it should now be here, so 5.5.2. Yours is probably a bit later, but that should not be a problem. Okay, let's go now to server.js here, which remember is kind of the file where we do all of the setup of our application. For example, the environment variables, or we import or express application, and we also start the server down here. And so this is also the file where we're going to configure MongoDB. So let's start by requiring our Mongoose package here. All right. And so now we have access to the Mongoose variable, and on there we simply call the connect method. All right. Now into this connect method, we need to, of course, pass in our database connection string, right? But remember that in there we still have the password. So basically this password placeholder here. And so before we pass in the string, we need to actually replace it. So replace it with the real password that we have here. All right. So let's quickly do that. And I'm simply going to call this variable db for database. And so let's get our process.env.database. So that is, of course, our variable where the string here is stored, right? So we're getting that, and then replace. And we want to replace password. Now this here comes from the HTML close tag package that I have on my VS Code. All right, so process.env.database password. Give it a save. And okay, so that makes sense, right? So we're simply replacing this placeholder string with our real password in this connection string. Okay, and so now we can use this variable in our mongoose.connect. So in here, the first argument is actually that connection string, so db, and then second, we pass in an object with some options, okay? And these are just some options that we need to specify in order to deal with some deprecation warnings, okay? So don't worry too much about these ones. So use new URL parser, set it to true. Then we need to use create index, also set to true, and then use find and modify and set it to false. All right. So again, these here are just some options to deal with some deprecation warnings. And so when you're creating your own applications, just go ahead and use just exactly the same. All right. Now this connect method here is going to return a promise. And so let's actually handle that promise by using then. And this promise here actually gets access to a connection object. So let's simply call it con here for connection. Okay, so basically this connection will be the resolved value of the promise. And so just to show you that we're actually connected, I want to just log this object to the console. So console.log connection. And actually I want to see the connections property on there. Okay, and we can also log to the console something like db connection successful. All right, give it a save here. And then of course it displays these warnings here because of our ESLint, but don't worry about that. That's just the way that we configured it, right? And so let's now go ahead and actually run this application. Now let me remember what kind of scripts we have. So we have start dev and start prod. Now since our script here is not just called start, which is kind of a standard, we always have to type npm run start dev instead of writing just npm start without the run. And so let me go ahead and change the name here back to start, and then we have start for production. Okay, so npm start. The app is running now. And indeed, our database connection was successful. So great. And now here we have our connections object. And as you see, there's a lot of stuff in here. And we can see our username here, the host, the password, of course. And this stuff here doesn't really matter, of course. I just wanted to log it here, just so we see that our connection was actually successful. And so let's get rid of that. And we can actually get rid of all this here as well. So this is just a one-liner here. Oh yeah, just missing this parenthesis. Okay, now here it's saying me that we declared this variable but never used it. So let's indeed get rid of it. All right, now just as a final step, let me show you how we could also connect to the local database, again, in case you're using that one. So let's just duplicate this line, comment it out. So this is the hosted database version, and then here we would just have to put in the local one. So that's database local. Let's give it a save. And we're also connected successfully to that one. Okay, so that's just how you would do it in that case. All right, but as I said, in this course, we will actually use the hosted one. So that's the one that I'm keeping here, right? Actually, I'm deleting this one. We don't need it anymore. Now, of course, there could also be problems connecting to the database. For example, the host might be down, or we might have some error in our connection string. And in that case, we should catch that error. But we will leave error handling for a bit later in the course. And so for now, I'm not having any catch method here, just the then method here, assuming that everything works fine. All right. And now finally, I want to actually go ahead and delete the collection that we already created in our database, just so that our Mongoose driver does not interfere with that in any way, so that there's no problem there. And so let's move back to Atlas here, hit on our collections, and then simply delete the collection from here. And now we need to put in here the name of the collection, just so we don't do any mistake here. So drop, and all right, so now we have an empty database here, ready to start filling with our data, starting right in the next couple of videos.